August 17, 1943. Over the skies of Germany. A B-17 Flying Fortress explodes in a massive fireball at 25,000 feet. The aircraft disintegrates in mid-air, sending 10 young Americans tumbling through the freezing atmosphere without parachutes. Their bodies fall for nearly 3 minutes before hitting the German countryside below. Inside the neighboring bomber, Staff Sergeant William Patterson watches in horror through his waist gunner position as 3 more fortresses burst into flames within seconds. Messerschmitt 109Es are everywhere. Cannon shells rip through aluminum fuselages like paper. The cockpit of the lead bomber ahead erupts in a shower of plexiglass and blood. The pilot's headless body slumps forward over the controls. Patterson sees a young navigator crawling toward the escape hatch, his flight suit on fire, before another burst of German 20mm rounds tears him apart. The temperature outside is 40 degrees below zero, but inside Patterson's bomber, spent brass casings from the machine guns are so hot they burn through his boots. He fires desperately at a Focke-Wulf 190 flashing past at 500 miles per hour. He misses. Everyone misses. The German fighters are too fast, too many, too deadly. Of the 376 B-17 bombers that departed England that morning, 60 will never return. Over 600 young Americans killed, missing, or captured in a single day. That is 1 in every 6 aircraft shot down. At this rate, every bomber crew faces mathematical certainty of death before completing their required 25-mission tour. The reason for this catastrophe is simple and terrifying. The bombers have no fighter escort over the target. American P-47 Thunderbolts can only fly part way into German airspace before their fuel runs out. They turn back, and the bombers continue alone into a sky filled with hundreds of Luftwaffe interceptors. But here is what makes this story extraordinary. The solution to this impossible problem will not come from a general or a famous aircraft designer. It will come from a material so ordinary, so ridiculous, that German engineers will laugh when they first discover it. Paper. Compressed kraft paper and glue. The same stuff used to make cardboard boxes. This humble material, shaped into simple cylinders and filled with gasoline, will extend the range of American fighters by hundreds of miles. It will enable them to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. It will break the back of the Luftwaffe. And it will help win World War II. The air war over Europe in 1943 is a nightmare that few Americans back home truly understand. Strategic bombing doctrine, developed over years by theorists like Billy Mitchell and Giulio Douhet, promises that heavily armed bombers flying in tight defensive formations can fight their way to any target and return safely. The theory looks brilliant on paper. In practice, it is killing thousands of young Americans every month. The B-17 Flying Fortress earns its name honestly. Each bomber bristles with 13.50 caliber machine guns. When flying in combat box formations, they create interlocking fields of fire that theoretically make attacking them suicidal for enemy fighters. But the Luftwaffe pilots are not suicidal. They are smart, experienced, and ruthless. They develop tactics specifically designed to break up bomber formations. They attack from 12 o'clock high, diving through the formations at speeds that give gunners only seconds to track and fire. They target lead aircraft, knowing that disrupting the formation leader creates chaos in the entire group. They concentrate devastating firepower on single bombers, knowing that a damaged aircraft struggling to maintain formation becomes an easy kill. October 14, 1943. The 8th Air Force returns to Schweinfurt for a second attempt at destroying the ball bearing plants. Of 291 bombers dispatched, 60 are shot down. Another 17 are damaged so badly they never fly again. 600 men lost in a single day. The press calls it Black Thursday. The air crews have other names for it, none of them printable. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and American military leaders watching these losses begin to question whether daylight precision bombing is even viable. The Royal Air Force has already abandoned daylight raids after suffering similar, devastating losses earlier in the war. They switched to nighttime area bombing. Some voices in the Allied command structure suggest the Americans should do the same. But nighttime bombing means accepting lower accuracy and higher civilian casualties. If they abandon precision strikes, what are they fighting for? The fundamental problem is range. American fighters simply cannot fly far enough to protect the bombers over their targets. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a massive aircraft built around an 18-cylinder radial engine, producing over 2,000 horsepower, has an internal fuel capacity that gives it a combat radius of only about 230 miles. Even with early external tanks, it cannot escort bombers much beyond the German border. The P-38 Lightning offers longer range, but its turbo superchargers are temperamental in the cold, damp European climate. Engine failures plague P-38 squadrons. The aircraft is less maneuverable than German fighters at medium altitudes, where most combat occurs. What the 8th Air Force needs is an aircraft that can fly deep into Germany, fight on equal or better terms with the best Luftwaffe fighters, and still have enough fuel to escort the bombers home. That aircraft exists. It is called the P-51 Mustang. But in late 1943, it has a problem that seems impossible to solve. The Mustang's story begins not with the United States Army Air Forces, but with the British. In 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approaches North American Aviation, asking them to build P-40 Warhawks under license. North American's chief designer, Edgar Schmood, counters with a bold proposal. "Give us 120 days," he says, "and we will design you a better fighter from scratch." The British are skeptical. 120 days later, North American rolls out the prototype. The NA-73X first flies in October 1940, and it is immediately clear that Schmood and his team have created something special. The Mustang's airframe features laminar flow wings that reduce drag significantly. Its sleek fuselage and efficient cooling system give it a speed advantage over most contemporary fighters. But the early Mustangs have a critical flaw. They are powered by Allison V1710 engines, which perform well at low altitudes, but lose power dramatically above 15,000 feet. Since most bomber escort missions occur at 25,000 to 30,000 feet, this makes the early Mustang unsuitable for high-altitude combat over Europe. Then, someone at Rolls-Royce has an idea that will change the course of the war. What if they mate the Mustang's exceptional airframe with the Merlin engine, the same power plant that makes the Spitfire such a formidable fighter? The Merlin features a two-stage supercharger that maintains power output at high altitudes. Initial tests proved the concept beyond anyone's expectations. The Merlin-powered Mustang is faster than almost anything in the sky at any altitude. It climbs like a rocket. It can outturn most German fighters, and crucially, it is fuel efficient. The Merlin burns significantly less fuel than the P-47's massive radial engine. But even with this miracle of engineering, the P-51B arriving in England in late 1943 has a combat radius of only about 450 miles. That is better than the P-47, but still insufficient to reach Berlin and back. Berlin lies nearly 600 miles from the bomber bases in England. The Mustang can get the bombers partway to their targets, but for the final leg, the bombers will still fly alone into that murderous sky. The solution comes through a combination of innovations that seem almost too simple to work. First, North American engineers add an 85-gallon fuel tank in the fuselage behind the cockpit. This increases internal fuel capacity from 184 gallons to 269 gallons. That single addition extends the Mustang's range by roughly 30%. But it is still not enough. To reach Berlin, the Mustang needs external drop tanks. And not just any drop tanks. They need to be large enough to carry substantial fuel, light enough not to compromise performance, cheap enough to produce in massive quantities, and designed to release cleanly when combat begins. American engineers developed drop tanks in multiple sizes: 75-gallon tanks, 108-gallon tanks, eventually 110-gallon tanks that become standard on the P-51D model. With internal fuel of 269 gallons plus two 110-gallon drop tanks, a P-51 can carry 489 gallons total. That translates to a combat radius exceeding 800 miles. Enough to escort bombers to Berlin and beyond, engage in combat, and return to England with fuel reserves. But here is where the story becomes truly extraordinary. Those drop tanks are not made of aluminum or steel. They are made of paper. Compressed kraft paper and waterproof glue. The same materials used in heavy-duty shipping boxes. The paper drop tanks are born of necessity and industrial genius. Aluminum is a strategic resource critically important for building aircraft structures. Using scarce aluminum for disposable fuel tanks that will be jettisoned over enemy territory seems wasteful when American industry is straining to produce enough aircraft to meet wartime demands. Engineers at several companies develop paper-based drop tank designs. The tanks consist of multiple layers of kraft paper, bonded with waterproof glue, and shaped in molds under pressure and heat. The resulting structure can hold over 100 gallons of high-octane aviation gasoline without leaking. It can withstand the vibration and G-forces of combat flight, and it weighs only about 80 pounds empty, roughly half the weight of an equivalent metal tank. There are skeptics. The idea of trusting a pilot's life to a tank made of paper and glue seems absurd. What if the glue dissolves? What if the paper disintegrates in rain? What if a single bullet hole causes catastrophic fuel leakage? But testing proves the concept sound. The paper tanks are actually more robust than critics fear. The multiple layers of kraft paper bonded together create a composite material with surprising strength. And in some ways, paper tanks are safer than metal ones. A bullet passing through metal can create sparks that ignite fuel vapors. A bullet through paper usually just makes a hole. The fuel drains out, but the risk of explosion is lower. By early 1944, American industry is producing these paper drop tanks by the millions. At peak output, factories manufacture over 500,000 drop tanks per month. Each tank costs only a few dollars to produce. This is not just engineering achievement. This is industrial genius on a scale that will stagger German observers when they finally understand what the Americans have done. The P-51 Mustang with paper drop tanks is about to become the deadliest fighter aircraft of World War II. It is about to reach Berlin. It is about to break the Luftwaffe. But the Germans do not know this yet. And when they finally realize what is happening, it will be far too late. In Part 2, We will witness the moment when P-51 Mustangs appear over Berlin for the first time. We will see the shock on the faces of Luftwaffe commanders who believed American fighters could never reach the German capital. And we will follow Adolf Galland, one of Germany's greatest aces, as he test flies a captured Mustang and delivers a warning that will chill the Nazi high command to its core. The slaughter of 1943 is about to become the revenge of 1944. March 4th, 1944. The skies over Berlin. Lieutenant Colonel Don Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group cannot believe what he is seeing through his canopy. Below him, stretching across the German capital, are the unmistakable shapes of factory complexes, rail yards, and the twisted streets of a city that Adolf Hitler promised would never be touched by enemy aircraft. Blakesley checks his fuel gauge. He has been flying for over 3 hours. He is 600 miles from England, and his tanks still show reserves. The paper drop tanks slung beneath his P-51 Mustang have done the impossible. They have carried him to Berlin. But this moment of triumph has been earned through months of struggle, institutional resistance, and battles fought not against the Luftwaffe, but against the American military establishment itself. Let us go back to where Part 1 ended. The paper drop tanks have proven their worth in testing. American factories are producing them by the hundreds of thousands. The P-51 Mustang, equipped with these revolutionary fuel containers, now has the range to escort bombers anywhere in the Reich. On paper, the problem is solved. In reality, the war is just beginning. Because the men who command the 8th Air Force do not believe in paper. General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force through the bloodiest months of 1943, has built his entire strategic philosophy around one concept: the self-defending bomber. Heavy bombers flying in tight combat box formations, bristling with machine guns, should be able to fight their way to any target without fighter escort. This is not just a tactical preference. This is doctrine. This is what Eaker has told Congress, told the British, told the American public. To admit that bombers need fighter escort all the way to the target is to admit that he has been wrong. That the deaths of thousands of young Americans in unescorted raids were preventable. That the entire strategic bombing campaign has been based on a flawed assumption. Eaker is not a bad man. He is not a fool. He is a pioneer of American air power who genuinely believes in his methods. But he is also a general who has staked his reputation on a theory that is being demolished by reality every time his bombers fly over Germany. In January 1944, command of the 8th Air Force passes to General Jimmy Doolittle, the hero of the Tokyo raid, a man with nothing to prove and everything to gain by winning the air war as quickly as possible. Doolittle looks at the casualty figures from 1943 and makes a decision that will change everything. He calls a meeting of his fighter group commanders. The room is filled with young colonels and lieutenant colonels, men who have been flying combat missions for months, who have watched bombers die while their fighters turn back for lack of fuel. Doolittle stands before them and speaks words that seem almost heretical. Your job is no longer to stay with the bombers. Your job is to destroy the Luftwaffe, wherever you find them, in the air, on the ground. I want you to go hunting. The fighter pilots cannot believe what they are hearing. For months, they have been ordered to fly close escort, staying with the bomber formations even when German fighters broke off and fled. Now, Doolittle is telling them to pursue, to chase, to kill. But there is a problem. This aggressive new strategy only works if the fighters have enough fuel to hunt German aircraft across the entire Reich and still return home. This is where the paper drop tanks become essential. Colonel Cass Huff is the technical officer responsible for evaluating and approving new equipment for the 8th Air Force. He has spent weeks examining the paper drop tanks, running calculations, studying test results. His conclusion is unambiguous. The tanks work. They are reliable. They should be deployed immediately on every P-51 in the theater. His recommendation lands on the desk of a supply officer who has never flown a combat mission. The officer looks at the specifications, sees the words compressed paper, and laughs. He writes a memo questioning whether American pilots should trust their lives to cardboard containers. The memo circulates through the bureaucracy. Delays multiply. Weeks pass. Meanwhile, bomber crews continue to die. Huff is furious. He takes his case directly to Doolittle's staff. He brings test data, engineering reports, performance analyses. He explains that paper drop tanks are not a compromise or a desperate measure. They are actually superior to metal tanks in several ways. They are lighter, which improves aircraft performance. They are cheaper, which means they can be produced in the quantities needed. They are safer because paper does not spark when punctured by bullets. One of Doolittle's aides asks the question everyone is thinking. "Colonel, are you telling us that we should bet the entire escort fighter program on tanks made from the same material as shipping boxes?" Huff does not hesitate. "Sir, I am telling you that those shipping boxes will carry our fighters to Berlin. And without them, we will keep losing bombers at rates that will cripple this Air Force." Doolittle approves the full deployment of paper drop tanks within 48 hours. The production numbers are staggering. American factories, already running at full capacity to produce aircraft, bombs, and ammunition, add drop tank manufacturing to their output. The tanks are made by companies that have never produced aviation equipment before. Furniture factories, packaging plants, any facility with the equipment to mold compressed paper under heat and pressure. By February 1944, the 8th Air Force has enough drop tanks to equip every P-51 Mustang in England. But having the equipment is not the same as using it effectively. Pilots need training. Ground crews need procedures. Tactics need to be developed. Colonel Don Blakesley commands the 4th Fighter Group, one of the most experienced P-51 units in the theater. He is a hard man who demands perfection from his pilots. He is also a practical man who understands that new equipment means nothing without proper employment. Blakesley gathers his pilots and explains the new reality. With paper drop tanks, they can fly missions that would have been impossible just months ago. But the tanks require careful management. Pilots must switch between drop tanks and internal fuel at the right moments. They must jettison the tanks before engaging in combat, or the added weight and drag will get them killed. They must trust the paper containers to deliver the fuel they promise. Some pilots are skeptical. One young lieutenant asks what happens if the glue dissolves at high altitude, if the paper disintegrates in the moisture of clouds. Blakesley's answer is direct. The tanks have been tested. They work. If you do not trust them, you can stay on the ground. But I promise you this, the pilots who fly with these tanks will be the pilots who win this war. The pilots who refuse will watch from the sidelines. No one refuses. February 20th, 1944. Operation Argument begins. History will remember it as Big Week. The plan is ambitious beyond anything the 8th Air Force has attempted. For 6 consecutive days, American heavy bombers will attack aircraft factories, engine plants, and ball-bearing production facilities across Germany. The RAF will bomb the same targets at night. There will be no pause, no rest for German industry or the Luftwaffe defenders. But the critical difference from previous operations is the fighter escort. P-51 Mustangs, carrying paper drop tanks, will accompany the bombers all the way to the targets. They will not turn back at the German border. They will not leave the bombers to face the Luftwaffe alone. On the morning of February 20th, over 1,000 heavy bombers take off from bases across England. With them fly hundreds of P-47 Thunderbolts for initial escort, and, for the first time in such numbers, P-51 Mustangs with extended range. The Luftwaffe responds with everything it has. Hundreds of Bf-109s and FW-190s rise to intercept the bomber stream. German fighter control officers, watching their radar plots, anticipate the moment when American escorts will reach their fuel limits and turn back. That moment never comes. The P-51s press deeper into Germany, still flying alongside the bombers. German controllers radio their fighters with confusion in their voices. The American escorts are still there. Over the target areas, where bombers have previously been slotted without protection, Mustangs engage German interceptors in swirling dogfights. The effect is devastating. In the first 2 days of Big Week, the Luftwaffe loses over 150 fighters. Not to bomber gunners firing desperately at attacking aircraft, but to P-51 pilots who can pursue, engage, and destroy German fighters on equal or better terms. German pilots are shocked. They have trained for one type of battle: attack the bombers, ignore the escorts, break off before ammunition runs out. Now they find themselves in a different war. American fighters chase them when they try to disengage. American fighters follow them down to low altitude. American fighters are everywhere, with enough fuel to fight until the German pilots are dead or fleeing. By the end of Big Week, the Luftwaffe has lost approximately 1/3 of its available single-engine fighters. More critically, it has lost over 100 experienced pilots. These are not replaceable. Germany's pilot training programs, already strained by fuel shortages and the demands of a two-front war, cannot produce veterans. They can only produce novices who will die within weeks of reaching operational squadrons. The American losses during Big Week are also significant. Over 200 heavy bombers are shot down, with approximately 2,600 casualties among bomber crews. But the strategic exchange rate now favors the Allies decisively. For every bomber lost, Germany loses fighters and pilots it cannot replace. The war of attrition has shifted. Then comes March 4th, 1944, the day that changes everything. A small force of bombers is scheduled to attack Berlin. Weather conditions are uncertain, and communication problems limit the effectiveness of the mission, but the symbolic importance is immense. If American aircraft can strike the German capital in daylight with fighter protection, it will prove that no target in the Reich is beyond reach. Colonel Don Blakesley leads his 4th Fighter Group on the escort mission. The flight is long, over 3 hours each way. Blakesley watches his fuel gauges constantly, calculating consumption rates, managing the switch from drop tanks to internal fuel with the precision of an engineer. Over Brandenburg, approaching Berlin, Luftwaffe interceptors rise to meet the American formation. Blakesley gives the order to drop external tanks and engage. His Mustangs jettison the paper containers that have carried them across Europe. The empty tanks tumble toward the German countryside below. Now clean and maneuverable, the P-51s tear into the German fighters. The combat over Berlin is fierce, but one-sided. American pilots, confident in their aircraft and their fuel reserves, fight aggressively. German pilots, outnumbered and facing opponents who will not break off pursuit, fight desperately. When Blakesley lands at his base in England that evening, his combat report confirms what the 8th Air Force has been hoping for. P-51 Mustangs have reached Berlin. They have engaged the Luftwaffe over the German capital. They have protected the bombers throughout the entire mission profile, and they have returned with fuel to spare. 2 days later, on March 6th, the 8th Air Force delivers the killing blow. Nearly 700 heavy bombers attack Berlin in broad daylight, escorted by over 150 P-51 Mustangs, plus additional P-38s and P-47s. The Luftwaffe rises to defend its capital and suffers catastrophic losses. Air raid sirens wail across Berlin. Civilians crowd into shelters. Anti-aircraft batteries fire thousands of shells into the sky. And high above, American fighters hunt German interceptors with a ferocity that borders on merciless. The message is clear. The Americans can strike anywhere, anytime, with fighter protection. The era of unescorted bomber raids, of Schweinfurt and Regensburg, of Black Thursday, is over. But the Germans are not finished. In the underground command centers of the Luftwaffe, officers study the reports from Big Week and the Berlin raids with growing alarm. Something has changed. The American fighters are operating at full combat capability over targets they should not be able to reach. German intelligence officers begin investigating. When they discover the truth about the paper drop tanks, their initial reaction is disbelief. Then comes understanding. Then comes fear. Because if the Americans have solved the range problem with something as simple as compressed paper and glue, what else can they do? What other impossible advantages are they developing? General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most decorated fighter aces, personally test flies a captured P-51 Mustang in early 1944. His assessment shocks the Nazi high command. The American fighter is superior to German aircraft at high altitude. Its range, with drop tanks, is extraordinary. The Luftwaffe cannot match it. Galland submits a report warning that unless Germany can neutralize the P-51 threat, the air war is lost. His superiors do not want to hear this. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, has promised Hitler that enemy bombers will never reach the Reich in daylight. Now, American fighters are overhead Berlin. The Nazi leadership responds with denial, then fury, then desperate measures. They accelerate production of jet fighters, like the Me-262, hoping that superior speed will counter the Mustang's advantages. They strip fighter units from other fronts, concentrating defenses over Germany. They implement new tactics, new training programs, new weapons. None of it will be enough, because the paper drop tank has given the Americans more than extended range. It has given them the initiative. From March 1944 onward, the 8th Air Force sets the tempo of the air war. The Luftwaffe can only react, defend, retreat. In Part 3, we will see the consequences of this shift in power. We will witness the destruction of the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force. We will learn how German pilots, many with only 30 hours of flight time, are thrown against American veterans with hundreds of hours of experience. And we will discover how the paper drop tanks that German engineers dismissed as cardboard containers will pave the way for the D-Day invasion. The battle for air superiority over Europe has been won. The battle for Europe itself is about to begin. Spring 1944. The skies over Germany have become a graveyard. In Part 1, we witness the slaughter of American bomber crews flying unescorted into the heart of the Reich. In Part 2, we saw how paper drop tanks transformed the P-51 Mustang into a war-winning weapon, enabling American fighters to reach Berlin for the first time. General Jimmy Doolittle unleashed his pilots with a simple order: hunt the Luftwaffe. Destroy it wherever you find it. Now the hunters have become the hunted. German fighter pilots who once dominated European skies are dying at rates their commanders cannot comprehend. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost approximately 90 fighters. By April, monthly losses exceed 400 aircraft. By May, they will lose over 500. But the aircraft losses are not the worst part. Pilots are dying faster than Germany can train replacements. The average life expectancy of a new Luftwaffe fighter pilot arriving at an operational squadron has dropped to 4 weeks. The paper drop tank, that simple cylinder of compressed craft paper and glue, has broken something fundamental in the German war machine. And the Nazis know it. In the underground command bunkers of Luftwaffe High Command, General Adolf Galland studies the intelligence reports with growing despair. Galland is no ordinary officer. He has over 100 confirmed aerial victories. He has personally test-flown a captured P-51 Mustang and understands exactly what his pilots are facing. His assessment is brutally honest. The American fighter is superior to everything in the Luftwaffe inventory at high altitude. Its range with external fuel tanks is extraordinary, and the Americans are producing these aircraft faster than Germany can shoot them down. Galland submits a detailed report to Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe. The report contains specific recommendations. Concentrate remaining fighter forces. Develop new tactics to counter the Mustang threat. Accelerate production of jet fighters like the Me-262, which has the speed to outrun any Allied piston-engine aircraft. Above all, Galland warns, the Luftwaffe must conserve its experienced pilots. Without veterans to lead and train new pilots, the fighter force will collapse. Göring's response is fury. He has promised Hitler that enemy bombers will never reach Berlin in daylight. Now, American fighters patrol over the German capital at will. Rather than accept Galland's analysis, Göring blames his pilots. He accuses them of cowardice. He threatens courts-martial for anyone who retreats from combat. He demands that pilots fly more missions, fight more aggressively, die more bravely. This is not leadership. This is denial. And it accelerates the Luftwaffe's destruction. German pilots respond to the impossible situation with courage that borders on desperation. They develop new tactics, attack from extreme high altitude, diving through bomber formations at speeds that give American escorts only seconds to react. Concentrate massive firepower on single bombers, destroying them before escorts can intervene. Use cloud cover and weather to ambush American formations when fighters are separated from their charges. Some of these tactics work temporarily. American bomber losses continue, though at lower rates than the catastrophic missions of 1943. But every engagement costs the Luftwaffe irreplaceable pilots. Every dogfight with P-51s ends with German fighters falling in flames. The exchange rate is devastating. For every American pilot lost, 3 or 4 German pilots die. But this is not the only crisis facing the men who fly for the Reich. Aviation fuel is running out. Allied bombers, now protected by long-range escorts, systematically destroy German synthetic fuel plants. Production drops from over 300,000 tons per month in early 1944 to less than 50,000 tons by autumn. Luftwaffe training programs, already inadequate, are cut further. New pilots arrive at operational squadrons with as little as 30 hours of flight time in their assigned aircraft. Some have never fired their guns in the air. Some have never practiced formation flying. They are sent against American pilots with 200 or 300 hours of experience. The results are predictable. Slaughter. In May 1944, Luftwaffe commanders implement a desperate measure. They ground most fighter squadrons, conserving fuel and pilots for a massive defensive effort when the Allied invasion comes. They know it is coming. Every intelligence report confirms that American and British forces are massing in England. The question is not if, but when and where. The Luftwaffe will have one chance. When the invasion begins, they will throw everything they have at the landing beaches. Hundreds of fighters, thousands of sorties. They will catch the Allies when they are most vulnerable. Troops crowded on beaches, supply ships anchored offshore, airfields not yet established. This is the plan. But the plan assumes the Luftwaffe will still exist when D-Day arrives. General Doolittle has other ideas. In the weeks before D-Day, the 8th Air Force launches a campaign specifically designed to destroy the Luftwaffe as a fighting force. This is not about protecting bombers. This is about annihilation. P-51 groups fly deep into Germany looking for trouble. They attack Luftwaffe airfields, catching fighters on the ground before they can take off. They strafe parked aircraft, fuel depots, maintenance facilities. They hunt German fighters that are trying to take off or land, shooting them down when they are most vulnerable. The tactics are aggressive to the point of recklessness. Pilots dive to treetop level, screaming across airfields at 400 miles per hour, while anti-aircraft guns fill the sky with tracers. They pursue German fighters to the deck, following them through valleys and around hilltops. Some American pilots are shot down by ground fire. Some crash into obstacles while flying too low. But the damage to the Luftwaffe is catastrophic. May 1944, the month before D-Day. On May 12th, the 8th Air Force launches massive raids against German synthetic fuel production facilities. Nearly 900 heavy bombers attack plants at Luna, Bohlen, Zeitz, Lützgendorf, and Brooks. The targets are protected by heavy anti-aircraft defenses and whatever fighters the Luftwaffe can put in the air. P-51 Mustangs, carrying paper drop tanks that will take them deep into Germany and back, escort the bomber formations. The Luftwaffe rises to intercept. What follows is one of the largest air battles of the war. Over Luna, German fighters attack in waves. Bf-109s dive through the bomber formations. FW-190s make head-on passes, their cannon shells tearing into B-17 fuselages. The sky fills with tracers, exploding aircraft, parachutes. But the P-51s are everywhere. Captain Robert F. Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group spots a formation of Bf-109s climbing toward the bombers. He drops his external tanks. His Mustang, now clean and maneuverable, dives on the Germans. His wingman follows. In the next 3 minutes, Johnson destroys 2 German fighters. His wingman gets 1. The remaining Germans scatter, their attack on the bombers disrupted. This scene repeats across the sky. Every German attack is met by American escorts. Every attempt to concentrate firepower on the bombers is broken up by P-51s that have the fuel to chase, the performance to catch, and the firepower to destroy. When the 8th Air Force returns to England that evening, they have lost 46 heavy bombers and 10 fighters. Heavy losses by any measure. But the Luftwaffe has lost over 65 fighters and, more critically, dozens of experienced pilots. The bombers have destroyed or damaged 5 major synthetic fuel facilities. German fuel production drops by 50,000 tons in a single day. The attacks continue through May. Every mission costs the Luftwaffe aircraft and pilots it cannot replace. Every raid on fuel facilities reduces the gasoline available for training and operations. The death spiral accelerates. May 21st. P-51 groups conduct fighter sweeps across Germany, attacking any Luftwaffe activity they can find. They destroy 29 German aircraft in the air and 44 on the ground. American losses are 7 fighters. May 28th. Another sweep. Another massacre. Over 50 German aircraft destroyed. American losses, 8 fighters. May 30th. The 8th Air Force launches over 1,000 bomber sorties against aircraft factories and airfields. P-51s account for 45 German fighters. Strafing attacks destroy another 60 aircraft on the ground. By the end of May 1944, the Luftwaffe has lost over 400 fighters and nearly 300 pilots in combat against American forces alone. British and Soviet operations account for hundreds more. The fighter force that was supposed to defend against the D-Day invasion has been bled white before the invasion even begins. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces land on the beaches of Normandy, in the largest amphibious invasion in history. Over 150,000 troops cross the English Channel. Nearly 7,000 ships support the operation. Thousands of aircraft provide air cover. The Luftwaffe response is pathetic. Despite frantic orders from high command to throw every available fighter at the invasion beaches, the Luftwaffe manages only approximately 100 sorties on D-Day. Most are ineffective. Allied fighters, many of them P-51s operating from bases in England, dominate the skies over Normandy. German aircraft that approach the beaches are shot down or driven off. The soldiers storming Omaha Beach and Utah Beach look up and see aircraft with white stars on their wings. Spitfires, Thunderbolts, Mustangs. They do not see Luftwaffe dive bombers strafing the landing craft. They do not see German fighters shooting men as they struggle through the surf. The sky belongs to the Allies. This is the payoff. This is what the air superiority campaign has achieved. This is why the paper-drop tanks matter. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces, tells his troops before the invasion that if they see aircraft overhead, they will be friendly. This is not propaganda. This is truth. The Luftwaffe has been so thoroughly destroyed that it cannot meaningfully contest the most important operation of the war. In the weeks after D-Day, the Luftwaffe's decline accelerates. Fuel shortages ground entire squadrons. Experienced pilots are killed faster than new ones can be trained. The Me-262 jet fighter enters service, and its superior speed gives it advantages against Allied piston-engine aircraft. But there are never enough of them, never enough fuel, never enough trained pilots. The strategic implications are profound. Allied ground forces advance across France with continuous air support. Every German troop movement is observed and attacked from above. Every supply convoy is vulnerable. Every defensive position can be bombed before ground troops assault it. The air superiority won by P-51 Mustangs in the spring of 1944 translates directly into saved lives on the ground. Historians estimate that the destruction of the Luftwaffe shortened the European war by many months. Every month the war continues costs tens of thousands of lives. The arithmetic is simple. Destroying German air power faster means fewer dead soldiers, fewer destroyed cities, fewer grieving families. The paper drop tank, that humble cylinder of compressed paper and glue, plays its role in all of this. Without the extended range it provides, P-51s cannot escort bombers to the distant targets that cripple German fuel production. Without drop tanks, American fighters cannot hunt the Luftwaffe across the entire Reich. Without drop tanks, the air superiority campaign of spring 1944 is impossible. The cost is high. Over 26,000 American airmen die in the European theater. Thousands more are wounded or captured. The 8th Air Force alone suffers more casualties than the entire United States Marine Corps in the Pacific. Every mission is a gamble. Every pilot who takes off knows he might not return. But they win. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe exists only as a shadow of its former power. Individual German pilots still fight bravely, still score occasional victories, but they cannot change the outcome. The American industrial machine produces aircraft and trains pilots faster than Germany can kill them. The strategic balance has shifted irrevocably. The P-51 Mustang becomes the symbol of this victory. Fast, beautiful, deadly. The aircraft that escorted bombers to Berlin. The aircraft that broke the Luftwaffe. The aircraft that helped win the war. But behind that aircraft is another story. A story of engineers who solved impossible problems. Of factory workers who built millions of drop tanks from paper and glue. Of pilots who trusted those paper containers to carry enough fuel to get them home. In Part 4, we will explore the legacy of this achievement. We will learn what happened to the men who flew these missions. We will see how the lessons of the air war over Europe shaped military aviation for generations. And we will answer the question that history often forgets to ask. What happened to the idea that everyone said was impossible? The war is not over, but its outcome is no longer in doubt. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. The guns fall silent across a continent that has been torn apart by 6 years of war. In England, crowds fill the streets of London, celebrating the defeat of Nazi Germany. In Berlin, Soviet and American soldiers meet amid the rubble of a shattered capital. In airfields across Britain, P-51 Mustang pilots sit in their cockpits for the last time, knowing they have survived something that killed so many of their friends. Let us trace the journey one final time. It began with slaughter. August 1943, American bombers flying unescorted into Germany, dying at rates that threatened to end the strategic bombing campaign entirely. It continued with innovation. Engineers who solved the range problem, not with exotic metals or revolutionary designs, but with compressed paper and glue. It reached its climax in the spring of 1944, when P-51 Mustangs carrying paper drop tanks escorted bombers to Berlin and broke the back of the Luftwaffe. And it concluded with D-Day, when Allied soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy, under skies that belonged entirely to their own aircraft. But what happened to the men who made this possible? What became of the technology that changed the war? And why does this story still matter, 80 years later? The answers reveal something profound about innovation, courage, and the strange ways that history remembers its heroes. General Jimmy Doolittle, who transformed the 8th Air Force from a defensive organization into an offensive weapon, returns to the United States as one of the most celebrated commanders of the war. His decision to unleash the fighters, to hunt the Luftwaffe rather than simply protect bombers, is recognized as a turning point in the air war. Doolittle receives the Medal of Honor, not for his command in Europe, but for the Tokyo Raid of 1942. He retires from the Air Force in 1959 as a lieutenant general and spends his remaining years advocating for aerospace research and education. He dies in 1993 at the age of 96, having lived long enough to see men walk on the moon and aircraft fly faster than sound. Edgar Schmood, the North American aviation engineer who designed the P-51 Mustang, continues his career in aerospace design. He works on the F-86 Sabre, the jet fighter that will dominate the skies over Korea in the 1950s. The Sabre incorporates lessons learned from the Mustang, including attention to aerodynamic efficiency and pilot visibility. Schmood never becomes a household name. Most people who admire the P-51 do not know who designed it. But within the aerospace industry, he is recognized as one of the greatest aircraft designers in American history. He dies in 1985, having created machines that flew faster and farther than anything he could have imagined when he proposed building a better fighter in 120 days. Colonel Don Blakesley, who led the 4th Fighter Group to Berlin on that historic March day in 1944, survives the war with over 500 combat missions. He is one of the most experienced fighter pilots in American history. But combat takes its toll. Blakesley returns home exhausted, his nerves frayed by years of constant danger. He struggles to adjust to peacetime life. The man who commanded hundreds of pilots in the deadliest skies of the war finds civilian existence difficult to navigate. He remains in the Air Force, but never achieves the general's stars that his combat record might have warranted. He dies in 2008 at the age of 91, remembered by aviation historians, but largely unknown to the general public. Adolf Galland, the German ace who warned his superiors about the P-51 threat, survives the war despite flying combat missions until the final weeks. He is captured by American forces and spends 2 years in detention while Allied investigators study German aviation technology and tactics. After his release, Galland becomes an aviation consultant, helping the Argentine Air Force develop its fighter capabilities. He writes memoirs that become essential reading for anyone studying the air war over Europe. In his later years, he attends reunions with former Allied pilots, men who once tried to kill each other, now sharing drinks and stories. Galland dies in 1996, respected by former enemies, who recognized that he told the truth about the Mustang, even when his superiors refused to listen. But the legacy of the paper drop tank extends far beyond individual lives. The technology itself evolves rapidly after the war. Metal drop tanks replace paper versions as aluminum becomes more abundant. But the fundamental concept remains unchanged. External fuel tanks become standard equipment on military aircraft worldwide. Every modern fighter jet, from the F-15 Eagle to the F-35 Lightning II, can carry external fuel to extend its range. The principle that 8th Air Force engineers proved in 1944, that disposable fuel containers can transform an aircraft's capabilities, remains as valid today as it was 80 years ago. The numbers tell the story of impact. During World War II, American factories produced over 15 million drop tanks of all types. P-51 Mustangs fly over 213,000 combat sorties in the European theater alone. They destroy over 4,950 enemy aircraft in the air, and another 4,131 on the ground. The 8th Air Force, which lost 60 bombers in a single day over Schweinfurt in 1943, sees its loss rates drop dramatically once long-range escort becomes available. Historians estimate that the air superiority campaign of 1944 saved tens of thousands of Allied lives by shortening the war and enabling the D-Day invasion to succeed. The Korean War proves the enduring value of these lessons. P-51 Mustangs serve again, this time in ground attack roles, while the F-86 Sabre fights MiG-15 over the Yalu River. External fuel tanks give American jets the range to reach deep into enemy territory. The tactics developed over Germany, aggressive pursuit, hunting enemy aircraft rather than merely defending friendly forces, become doctrine. Vietnam brings further refinement. American pilots face sophisticated Soviet-built air defenses and learn again that range and endurance matter as much as speed and firepower. The ability to loiter over targets, to provide continuous air support, to reach distant objectives and return safely. All of this traces back to innovations proven in the skies over Berlin. Today, aerial refueling has largely replaced drop tanks for long-range missions. But the fundamental insight remains. Aircraft capability is meaningless without the fuel to employ it. The engineers who designed paper drop tanks in 1943 understood this truth. Modern air forces, with their tanker aircraft and precision logistics, have simply found new ways to apply the same principle. But the deepest lessons of this story are not about technology. They are about people. The paper drop tank succeeded because someone was willing to challenge conventional thinking. The experts said fighters could not escort bombers to distant targets. The engineers asked why not. The bureaucrats said paper containers were ridiculous. The manufacturers proved they worked. The traditionalists said close escort was the only proper role for fighters. Doolittle said, "Hunt the enemy and destroy him." Every major innovation in military history follows this pattern. Someone sees a problem that others accept as unsolvable. Someone proposes a solution that seems impossible or absurd. Someone has the courage to test the idea despite ridicule. And if the idea works, everything changes. The machine gun was supposed to make cavalry obsolete, but generals kept ordering mounted charges until millions died. The aircraft carrier was supposed to replace the battleship, but admirals kept building dreadnoughts until Pearl Harbor proved them wrong. The tank was supposed to break the stalemate of trench warfare, but commanders used them as infantry support until German blitzkrieg showed their true potential. The paper-drop tank fits this pattern perfectly. The technology was simple. The concept was obvious in retrospect. But implementing it required overcoming institutional resistance, manufacturing challenges, and the natural human tendency to keep doing what has always been done. This is the real lesson for today. Innovation rarely fails because the idea is wrong. It fails because the system resists change. The engineers who designed paper-drop tanks were not geniuses who saw what others could not see. They were practical people who asked simple questions and refused to accept that problems were unsolvable. And there is one final detail that most people do not know. When German engineers at the Rechlin test facility first examined captured paper-drop tanks in early 1944, they were puzzled. The construction seemed primitive: compressed paper and waterproof glue, materials that any furniture factory could produce. Some German officers reportedly dismissed the tanks as evidence of American resource shortages, proof that the United States was running low on aluminum and forced to use inferior substitutes. They could not have been more wrong. The paper-drop tanks were not a sign of scarcity. They were a sign of abundance. America had so much industrial capacity that it could afford to use premium aluminum exclusively for aircraft structures, while manufacturing disposable fuel tanks from paper. Germany, struggling to produce enough aluminum for basic aircraft production, could not comprehend this level of industrial wealth. This misunderstanding captures something essential about the war. Germany lost not because its soldiers were less brave or its engineers less skilled. Germany lost because it faced an opponent with seemingly unlimited resources, unlimited creativity, and the willingness to solve problems through mass production rather than elegant engineering. The paper-drop tank, that humble cylinder of compressed craft paper and glue, symbolized everything Germany could not match. Cheap, simple, effective, produced by the millions, discarded after a single use because there would always be more. 80 years later, most of those paper-drop tanks are gone. They disintegrated on impact when jettisoned over Europe. They were scrapped after the war. They rotted in storage. A few survive in museums, preserved as curiosities from a vanished age. Visitors walk past them without understanding their significance. They look at gleaming P-51 Mustangs and powerful Merlin engines. They do not notice the simple paper containers that made everything else possible. But the legacy endures. Every fighter pilot who flies with external fuel tanks is using technology proven by those paper cylinders. Every Air Force that emphasizes range and endurance over raw speed is applying lessons learned over Berlin in 1944. Every military innovation that challenges conventional wisdom follows the path blazed by engineers who said yes when others said impossible. From compressed paper and glue to victory over the most powerful air force in Europe. From an idea dismissed as ridiculous to a technology that changed the course of World War II. From young Americans dying in unescorted bombers to P-51 Mustangs hunting the Luftwaffe over Berlin. This is what innovation looks like. Not always glamorous, not always recognized, but absolutely essential. The paper drop tank helped save tens of thousands of lives. It helped destroy an air force that had terrorized Europe for 5 years. It helped win a war that decided the fate of civilization. And it was made from cardboard. If you know another story of a simple innovation that changed military history, share it in the comments below. World War II produced hundreds of such innovations, each with its own heroes, its own struggles, its own lessons. Subscribe to discover more of these untold stories from history. Because sometimes the most important weapons are not the ones that fire bullets. Sometimes they are the ones that carry fuel. And sometimes the ideas that everyone calls impossible are the ones that change everything.